Welcome to the Launch Family Podcast, where we make sense of modern parenting one real conversation at a time. I'm your host, Jessica Shelley, a mom of six, former teacher, and your trusted friend helping you cut through the noise of today's parenting overload. If you've ever faced challenges getting the right support for your child or wondered how to navigate the complex worlds of 504 plans, ADHD diagnoses, and school advocacy, you're not alone. Here, we talk with parents, experts, and educators who are passionate about giving families the tools and confidence they need to advocate fiercely and parent with clarity. Today, I'm so excited to welcome our guest, Megan Surso. Megan is a devoted mom of three, a passionate advocate for her children, and someone who understands firsthand the struggles and the victories of navigating medical diagnoses, special education supports, and real-world school challenges. Through her persistence, resilience, and heart, she's here to share what she's learned so other parents don't have to feel so alone. Megan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. Well, I want to dive into your backstory a little bit here. So give us a little bit more context for your family, what led you to this kind of world of IEPs, 504s, and school advocacy.
Sure. So it really truly started with my middle son, who is now 8. I think he was about 3.5, turning 4. And we had just sent him to preschool as a peer, a typical peer to be alongside students with disabilities, not knowing that he had a hidden disability that, we had no idea about. So I know not a whole lot of people know about selective mutism. But that's what he was diagnosed with. And it was pretty hallmark for us because at home and around family, we didn't have any challenges or see him as being the quiet kid. And when I say quiet kid, I mean at school, it was probably November when they said they had never heard him speak a word at all. So that's kind of what led us down that path, was the teacher really saying, hey, I think there's something else going on here. So we worked with Akron Children's to get a diagnosis. And then at that time, he was diagnosed as a selective mute, which is actually an anxiety disorder. So that was kind of our very first jump into this. And I know we can chat later too. I have 2 other children who do have diagnosed ADHD, which is a very, obviously very different than what my middle son has. So yeah.
Yeah. Can you walk us through some of those first moments when you realized that he had this other diagnosis, and how did you even find an evaluation? Like if you just got this feedback from school, how did you know what your next steps were?
Sure. So it was pretty jarring for us as parents. I remember when the teacher put the folder on the table and kind of slid it across to us. I mean, we looked at each other like, she has to have the wrong folder. I even double checked to make sure that it said his name because I just truly didn't believe it. So I think maybe a little bit of denial and then immediately guilt for not seeing that and not realizing. But it truly is not something that you would realize until your child is in group social settings where those social norms are expected. So the teacher actually mentioned something called a developmental pediatrician. And just in my own line of work, I happen to know what that is. But as a parent, I didn't really know what that meant. So we called the office and they said, sorry, you can't just come here. You have to go to your family practitioner first. So parents who are maybe in a similar boat or questioning, like, hey, maybe do we need a developmental pediatrician? You do have to start with your family physician or your primary care first, and then they make the referral. So that was kind of our journey into figuring out like where to go and who to talk to and what the next steps were.
Was that a similar experience as well with your other 2 children with the ADHD
Yeah.
diagnosis?
So at that point, I kind of knew what I was doing, right? Like, hey, I can't just jump over them and go straight to developmental peds. And there was a big shift too, because my son is now 8. So that was all pre-COVID. So getting into a developmental pediatrician was not that long of a waiting list. I want to say maybe a month or 2 when we called. But when we started noticing signs in our daughter, who she's 6th grade now, but at the time it was about 3rd and 4th grade, that waiting list was insane. And in fact, Akron Children's just emailed me the letter saying, hey, we're ready to see you. It's been 3 years.
Wow.
That has been like a totally different journey. And I think a lot of parents are probably in the same boat and struggling with the long wait list or what to do. Or if you're just told what to, or like, you need to wait, then what are the next steps? Kind of struggling.
Yeah, what were some of those steps that you've taken over the last couple of years to support your kids while you were waiting for that? Okay, we're finally ready to see you.
Yeah, and it's just so hard to figure out, who does your insurance cover? if it's that important, which, obviously it is, do you go with somebody who's outside your network? Do you travel longer distances to see that person? So we had heard of a physician in another health system. So we called, and the secretary was super friendly and told me that it would be a 6-month wait, which I thought was better, but not good enough, because I felt like we needed help now. So she said, there isn't a cancellation list, but if you call me back every day at 8 a.m., I promise that if somebody cancels, we'll get you in. So I think from our perspective with that, you just have to be the squeaky wheel. And I know a lot of parents, you'll just get that phone call of, hey, we'll see you in 6 months to a year. Well, that's not really acceptable when you have a child who needs help. So my advice is to, make a connection with somebody in the office, ask about a wait list. If there's not, ask what else you could do, like calling back every day.
Yeah. Yeah. What were some of those like biggest challenges? I know that you had mentioned like the scheduling piece even is a big challenge at the get-go, but what were some of those like big challenges or surprises that you've had along this journey of the diagnoses, navigating that, and then maybe also this kind of transition towards school?
Mhm. I think for us, obviously the biggest one's getting the diagnosis, and then not that schools don't believe you, but I think it's hard sometimes when you're saying like, hey, my kid has a disability that you can't really see, right? Like you can't really see someone with anxiety, maybe a little bit. You can't really see ADHD. So I think that was probably the biggest hurdle that we had to navigate, because the school often sees happy children who are compliant. I'm lucky that they don't have behavior issues at school like some families have. So they don't appear to have a disability. And I think it's even harder when you're talking about girls, because girls appear to be, just from my experience, more social, or, not in and up out of their seat as much. So I think it was just shocking for some of the teachers to say like, oh, wow, really? Like I'm finding it hard to believe that your child actually has that. So.
Yeah, yeah. And then like your profession, right? So let's like tune in into like who you are too and what you do day in and day out. So can you give us a little bit of background on what you do for your job?
Sure. So I'm a special education coordinator, which means I oversee IEPs, 504s, the whole process from pre-K up until 8th grade. So it is something on the school side and professionally that I am very familiar with, but navigating it as a parent is a totally different ballgame. And I already have all that experience to go with it. So I understand how difficult the journey is, especially when maybe you don't even understand what all of those acronyms are. So having all that knowledge, I still have that struggle of like, what do I do? Who do I go to? Maybe I feel like her needs aren't being met this year in middle school. Like, who do I go to next? So I'm right there along with a lot of parents in the same boat.
Right. Even if you
Yeah,
have all of the professional training, it's
totally.
still different when you're in the parent seat.
It's totally different. Yeah,
Okay, well, I want to kind of transition towards more of like that school discussion. You know, you had mentioned IEPs and 504s. Can you just start with like what is an IEP and a 504 and how are they different? And then how do you know what is the right option for your child or what to ask
sure.
for, I guess?
Yeah. So if you feel like your child's struggling at all, reach out to the school, reach out. Sometimes there's a guidance counselor, the principal, usually your kid's teacher is the first place to start. And just ask, hey, how's my kid doing at school? Do you notice these struggles that we're noticing at home? That's kind of the first step to open that door of like, I think there might be something going on. What do you guys think? And then I'm sorry, could you say that other question again?
Yeah, so how do you know like should I ask for an IEP or should I ask for a
Got it.
504? Like what kind of questions should I ask to those people if I have concerns?
Yeah, so there is a pretty big difference between the two. So an IEP is an individualized education program, which means that your student or child has a deficit in an area that needs to be taught and instructed differently. So there's such a large skill gap that something different needs to happen instead of just like the regular reading instruction that everybody gets, or the regular social emotional learning that everyone gets. So that really means that there is a skill deficit that we need to teach in a different way, maybe with a different person. And then the 504, the way I like to think about it, because it is a general education plan, is it's leveling the playing field. So if you think about it, like somebody who's using a wheelchair, well, a ramp is a universal access for everybody. Not only does it help people in wheelchairs, but it also helps moms with strollers, little kids who might not be able to go up and down stairs yet. So those are really just kind of accommodations that your kid needs to be able to be successful. So that might be extended time on tests and homework. Maybe instead of having to generate words in their head, they're given a word bank. Or, my daughter can be a little bit fidgety, so she needs extra breaks. So if something's really long, she might give herself that break by saying she needs to go to the bathroom or a locker, and she's just giving herself a walk break. So it's really, think of it just as a way to level the playing field, to give them a little extra boost to get them to what everybody else is getting.
Awesome. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for providing that
sure.
clarity. So also to kind of summarize, then an IEP is much more based on like the academic piece of what you're doing. The 504s is like accommodating whatever the other needs are to help them access like grade level content.
Sure. Yeah. And IEPs too can be academic, behavioral, social, emotional. So let's say if your child has autism and they have social skills deficits where they need to be seen by a speech language pathologist or maybe an occupational therapist to work on fine motor handwriting. It's all those like extra services that a student would need to be able to access their curriculum just like everyone else with goals. So then that 504 is kind of the basic accommodations, and IEP goes deeper. Like, hey, what do we need to teach them that's different than everybody else?
Thank you so much for clarifying again.
Sure. It's
When you
confusing.
It is. I mean, the
Yeah,
acronyms, right? Like I'm in education. I have that background as well, but also it's good to just like have the refresher. And like some people don't have that background.
sure.
I assume too, like the parents that are listening in are not all educators. So
Right.
this is a great conversation. When it comes to like the IEP and 504 plans, you had mentioned connecting with your child's teacher as kind of a good first step.
Mhm.
What do you wish that more parents understood about the difference between the different plans, or maybe even some like sample questions that they could ask to start this process or at least have the conversation?
Starting with it's tricky because it really does depend on the need. But I think if you start with, how is my child doing compared to same aged peers? And then if it's a boy who's struggling with being out of their seat, how much is he out of his seat compared to other boys that are out of his seat? So looking at a child who has, a similar background, similar makeup, because my youngest also has ADHD and he can be a little bit more fidgety. But I think sometimes when teachers are calling attention to it, it's like, oh, wow, they're out of their seat a lot. Well, is he really? If you look at other 6-year-old boys that age, are they all out of their seat a lot, or are we just really focused because we know he has ADHD and we're watching more? So I think that's kind of where to start.
That's a great perspective too, because
Yeah,
it's like when you get a new car and you're like, oh man, I didn't realize that everybody has the same car as me.
yeah,
But when you're hyper attuned to that, as an educator, you do watch for that more frequently. So I love that
totally.
positioning for parents of like compared to other students in the class because it may not be a big of a concern if
Right.
there's that kind of like anchor, I guess. So
Yeah,
ADHD is something that families are encountering. They don't necessarily have the background, or, I mean, even just like from people that do have the background, it is a
for
big
sure.
step in trying to navigate things. So, can you talk a little bit more about your journey of noticing some of these signs in your children? What were some of those early signals? And then what made you realize it was time to pursue an evaluation?
Sure. And I can talk about my daughter first, just because she was the first one that we really noticed that with. And we do have that family history of ADHD in our family, and it does tend to run in families. So I would caution parents, if you have something in your background, dyslexia, autism, ADHD, and you're worried about your children, share that with the school because that just gives them more background information of like where to start. But I'd say we started noticing around third or fourth grade. So in kindergarten through second grade, everybody is learning, the letter sounds, the letter names, how to read, how to blend. And I feel like they're very rote skills that a lot of kids come to school with. And then for grades 3 through 5, and then even beyond that, I think you're asking them to do a lot of application. There's a lot of multi-step problems, multi-paragraph essays. And then it's no longer, I don't feel that the answers are like in the print anymore. They have to make these connections and think, hey, what is the author's purpose? How was that character feeling? That's really hard if you're trying to hold all that information in your head and then you're distracted by thoughts in your head, or my daughter's a beautiful artist, but sometimes it gets a little distracting. So I think maybe around third or fourth grade is where we really started to notice. And then fourth grade is when it really kind of made us say, all right, we need to do something, because she is very intelligent and her grades started dipping. And then her school confidence started dipping. It was like, well, I don't want to go to school. School is hard. I don't understand. That's when they also start switching classes where we are. So it's multiple teachers, lots of assignments to keep together. So I think that was really pivotal for us. And then where she goes, sixth grade is when they go to middle school. So we just kept saying, we have to have a plan in place, whether it's a 504 medication, combination of everything. I just knew sending her to middle school would be really hard to begin with. Being a sixth grade girl is pretty hard, but then having that on top of it, we just wanted to set her up for success ahead of the transition. So.
Yeah. So what are some of those like practical steps that parents can take today if they're starting to notice some of these challenges? Maybe it's not like full force. Maybe they haven't heard from the teacher yet, but maybe they're noticing things at home. What are some of those like practical steps to maybe start moving this process?
I think if you as a parent maybe could make some notes to have some like real time observations to share with the teacher. Something that's really hard for us at home is if I say a two-step direction, like go upstairs, brush your teeth, and bring your glasses down. She might only do the last thing she heard, which was bring your glasses down. Or she might get upstairs and say, hey, what was it that you asked me to do again? So even just stuff that you're noticing at home, hey, it takes my kids 6 times to do something when I ask them. Now, we know some kids just do that. I have a middle schooler. I know middle schoolers are like that, but try to think, either compared to other kids that you know or other kids that you've seen, is it really taking them so much longer to get started? Homework is another great place to watch. Like a lot of things that we do with our daughters on the Chromebook, that's really hard for someone with ADHD to keep organized, especially because she's distracted by all the fun things like the font size, the color, the background tabs. And then it's like, hey, write an essay. Oh, well, now it's underlining all the words in pretty colors. So it's it's a little bit challenging from that sense. But I know that a lot of other kids don't struggle in the same way. So just making a note of that to say, homework's taking us 2 hours when I hear my friends saying it takes their kid an hour. And just making some notes, because it's, you get on a parent teacher conference, you get nervous, maybe you only have 10 minutes to talk to them. And it's like, hey, I want to share all this information with you. But if you could say, hey, I wrote some stuff down. Would you mind if I email it to you and take a look at it? Then they could share it with, the counselor, school psychologist, the principal, and really compare it. Like, hey, are we seeing this here at school too? And is this typical, or is it kind of out of the norm?
I love those strategies too. And I think, the way I have 6 children. And so I'm like, okay, well, how would I actually do this and take notes and keep them all straight for myself? Right.
Yeah,
But I'm thinking like even just like a notes app or like a text
totally.
message and be like, okay, I'm going to watch just this child today. I'm going to watch like the morning transition. Can they do multi-step, sort of processes? What are some of those other times during the day that they like, if you can zone in for like 15 minutes and watch, that would be really helpful to kind of take that information.
I
You had
think
mentioned homework.
anytime that you're expecting like an independent task, so the self-care routines of like, maybe taking vitamins before bed, brushing teeth, taking a shower, getting their pajamas out. So all of those steps along the way, and noticing, how much independence do they have? How much do I have to step in along the way? Like, are they able to do that and shower? Do I have a younger child who's able to do it without any reminders? That might give you an idea of like, hey, this seems a little bit out of the norm compared to what my other children can do. And if you don't have another child, I think just noticing like, hey, I feel like that's taking longer than it should. Or in my experience, I'm having to give them 10 to 15 reminders, and knowing that that's a little bit higher than it should be at that age.
Do you know off the top of your head, and if not, we can always put stuff in the show notes too, but like when is it typical that they can do like their morning routine or their evening routine mostly independent?
Oh gosh, I think if you were not seeing that by second or third grade, and I'm talking completely independent, right? Like go in and do it all. It might be messy, but they're getting it done. And you're needing all those frequent reminders. That might be time to start saying like, hey, maybe I should just make a note of this, or maybe I should track it down a little bit. And then if you want to try something, which I think is so helpful, put a checklist in place, put a little visual checklist on the mirror. If your child can read, great, use words. And if they can't, use pictures. Maybe it has a picture of the vitamins, a picture of the toothbrush, a picture of the shower, and they can check it off each time, or use Velcro or something that's very, very simple. And if you notice, like, hey, I put that in place and now they're completely independent, then you might realize that they need that visual or they need that checklist to help them get up to where all their peers are doing it completely independently.
That is a great perspective and super helpful for the classroom teacher to also
Yeah.
understand, like, hey, we have a visual schedule at home or a visual checklist at home. This is something that could maybe be beneficial for keeping them on track and independent in the classroom too.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
oh, I love this conversation. This is so great. Practical tips. That's what we need
Practical
as
tips.
parents, right? You know, kind of considering your journey and how you've gone through this kind of multiple times in different capacities, of course, with your three children,
Mhm.
what mindset shifts have helped you stay strong through the frustrations and the setbacks and those kind of conversations that can be difficult that you're having?
I think just giving yourself a little bit of grace and not blaming yourself or thinking it's something that I did or didn't do or it's because of me. It's just the way they are and who they are as people. So it is really hard. And I say that. And some days we have really hard days too of like, oh, why can't they just do that? Or why do I have to give so many reminders? But I think just really understanding that there really isn't any normal anymore. It's kind of like, well, that's not normal. What is normal? I think there's so many different journeys that people are on and kids are on and learning styles and things that we can and can't accommodate that I think if you just get out of your own head and out of your own way a little bit of like, maybe you tell yourself it's not normal, but it's okay. It's okay that it's different. And the journey that I'm on is a little bit different than the journey other people are on. So I think really just kind of getting rid of that preconceived notion that everybody has to be normal and follow the same like path that we did as children growing up is going to be what helps you help your own child.
Yeah, I think like grace and flexibility are also like two words that come to mind as you're describing what you're going through. And this kind of feeling of a setback, right? Like if you
Yes.
have that checklist in place and it doesn't work tomorrow, but it worked today, like that's okay. Try it again the next day after. And
Right.
my second son, he actually has ADHD as well. And one of the things that worked for him was visual schedules. And so it would work for like a week. He was super motivated, and we're like, okay, but then the second week comes and he's not following through. Like,
Yeah.
where is this disconnect? Like, we know this structure works, but it's not carrying over past the weekend.
Hmm.
The one thing that we implemented was we have like different themes. So like he can have like a Minecraft theme week, he
That's
can have like
great.
Mario theme week. And it's like it's still the same schedule. It just like looks a little
Yeah.
different for him. And it's like that's kind of what he needs to like mix it up a little to stay engaged. And so I think that that's like the flexibility. And again, coming back to that information that you had shared, like, take the notes. Like, if it's
Hmm.
working, great. Can you also just try it? Can it look a different way? Can they
Hmm.
maybe write it out? Can they maybe have ownership of some piece of that to
Sure.
maybe feel them help them feel more engaged? So, um, yeah, I think that from your experience, that it really does come back to that grace and that flexibility. Um, and so as you're looking ahead, what advice would you give to any parent who's maybe just starting this journey?
I think just starting, give yourself some grace, give yourself some credit, and then reach out and find your people. You're not alone. You're not the only person who has a child with anxiety or ADHD or autism. I think when you can find your network of people to say like, hey, my kid has ADHD, it's noon, I don't really know what to do, you'll find five other people who are going through the same thing. So I think really finding a network of people that you can relate to or just even share your frustrations with. It's super frustrating that I have to do this still, or I don't know how to help my child at school, and they might have other advice for you. I know all kids are different, but really a lot of these strategies work for a lot of different areas that your kid might be struggling. So I think just reaching out, finding your network, realizing that you're not alone, be upset, angry, mad for a little bit, and then try to move on. It's something that as your children get older, of course, this is up to every parent to decide. Talk to your kid about their diagnosis or their disability. It's been huge for us, knowing that my daughter's in sixth grade, my youngest is six, and he knows he has ADHD, and we talk about it and we talk about the frustrations that he experiences. But I always try to put a spin on it and I call it their superpower. So I know this might seem a little, off, but what I do is try to celebrate all the things that they are really good at. My daughter is a phenomenal artist. Her art is absolutely beautiful and it's something that I am terrible at. I could never draw the way that she does, and it's just a natural ability. And we know that kids with ADHD typically tend to have a higher creativity side. So really trying to promote that and then find things that are in their interest area, like taking a pottery class or signing them up for an art class that they, have never heard of before, and do something in that way to celebrate those things that they are good at and to help keep boosting their confidence. Yeah, school is hard, but that's not what life is about. Being a well-rounded person and being creative is way more important to me than, getting an A on a paper at school. So that's just one way we try to turn it and celebrate it as a family, is like, hey, this is a superpower that you guys have that I don't have.
I
Yeah,
love that. I love that. We all have our own strengths, right?
we
And
do.
just because there's a label or a diagnosis attached to something doesn't mean that they don't have a strength. So I
Sure.
love that positioning too of superpowers. Moms are superheroes. Like we hear
Yeah.
about it. We hear about
Yeah.
this. I'm like superheroes. So the kids are also superheroes in that sense too. So with their superpowers.
Yeah.
Well, at Launch Family, we've created a parenting guide called Emmy, so a trusted resource for navigating modern family life. So before we wrap up, I'd love to get your insights on a question that parents have been asking. So the question is, how can I advocate for my child without feeling like that parent at school? So what strategies have worked for you in staying firm, but also that kind of collaborative mindset?
I think just again, going back to being the advocate for your child, you can do it in a kind way. And again, I hate to say it, ask a question instead of maybe making the statement. Ask it as a question, as instead of saying, hey, don't you notice this at school? Don't you notice that my child's so off or they're struggling? Like, hey, do you notice that my child's struggling? What does it look like in class when my child's asking to take breaks? So pose it as a question, instead of maybe a statement coming off that way, because it's going to seem more collaborative and like a partnership rather than this is something that I see and I experience and you're not.
Yes, yes. It is like you're moving us side by side, right? Like there's no
Yes.
hierarchy here. You're your child's expert. They understand the school setting. So you ultimately have to figure out strategies that work for both home and school. And so I love that kind of collaborative effort. Start with a question. That's a really kind of simple way to reframe some of the concerns. So Megan, thank you so much for sharing your real life journey, your advocacy wisdom, and your encouragement with us today. Your voice is such a powerful reminder that being a persistent advocate isn't just necessary, it's this beautiful act of love that we can have for our children. If you've loved today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and stay tuned for updates from Launch Family. We'll be sure to link Megan's advocacy tips and additional resources in the show notes for you to help keep moving forward with confidence. Until next time, remember, you are your child's biggest advocate, and your persistence can change everything.